On the night of January 11th, 1983, four men walked into the counting room of the Stardust Casino in Las Vegas and removed $1.5 million in cash that had never been recorded. The casino's owners never knew. The IRS never knew. Nobody knew, except the mob bosses in Kansas City, Chicago, and Milwaukee who had been running this operation for almost a decade. That night would be the last skim. Within 18 months, the FBI had wiretaps in place, the bosses were indicted, and the era of organized crime controlling Las Vegas was over forever. But here is what nobody tells you. The mob didn't lose Las Vegas because of law enforcement. They lost it because they got greedy. They built the most sophisticated money laundering operation in American history, and then they refused to stop, even when every signal said the walls were closing in. This is the story of how the American Mafia turned a desert into a money machine, how they moved millions of untaxed dollars across state lines, undetected, for years, and how one catastrophic decision, a decision born out of ego, not strategy, handed the FBI exactly what it needed to bring them down. The house always wins. Unless the house is run by criminals, then it just depends on how long they can keep counting. In 1945, Las Vegas was a stopover town. One main road, a handful of motels, annual tourism revenue that barely registered on state ledgers. Benjamin Siegel saw something different. He saw a jurisdiction with no existing power structure, no established families, and weak law enforcement. He saw a place where organized crime could operate in the open, legally, because gambling was legal. The mob would not need to hide, it would simply own the business. Siegel's Flamingo Hotel opened in December 1946. It lost money immediately. Within 6 months, Siegel was dead, shot through the window of his girlfriend's home in Beverly Hills, a contract hit ordered by his own partners. But the idea survived him. By 1950, Meyer Lansky, the financial architect of the American Mafia, had quietly restructured the investment. New frontmen, new management, same arrangement. The casino profits would flow upward to crime families across the country through a process that was almost breathtakingly simple. They called it the skim. And for 30 years, it was the most profitable financial operation in the United States that nobody in Washington knew existed. Here is how it worked. Every Las Vegas casino counted its cash in a back room called the counting room. Money came off the floor, got counted, and was recorded. Whatever was recorded became the official revenue, the number that went to the IRS, to Nevada regulators, to shareholders. The skim happened before the counting. A portion of cash, sometimes 10%, sometimes more, was physically removed from the count before it was recorded. It never entered the books. It never generated a tax liability. It was simply gone. The money was bundled, placed in paper bags, suitcases, or the false bottoms of ordinary-looking luggage and carried by couriers to cities across the country. Chicago got its cut, Kansas City got its cut, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and the New York families got their shares. For the mob, Las Vegas was not a city. It was an ATM with a buffet attached. By 1960, the skim had become institutional. It required logistics, scheduling, and personnel, exactly like a legitimate business operation, except that its entire purpose was to violate federal law. The key figure in the machine's day-to-day operation was Carl Thomas. Thomas was not a mobster. He was a casino executive, a man with genuine expertise in casino operations who had been recruited precisely because he understood the counting room better than anyone. Thomas would later tell the FBI that the operation was not chaotic. It was scheduled. Couriers arrived on specific dates. The amounts were pre-agreed. The bosses in the Midwest received detailed accounting of what they were owed and what they had received. Thomas kept records, which would later destroy him. Between 1974 and 1983, the FBI estimates that more than $2 million per month flowed out of Las Vegas casinos through the skim. Some analysts place the total figure across all operations and all decades at over $100 million. This was not petty crime. This was a 9-figure financial operation running for decades inside a fully licensed, fully regulated American industry. And regulators had no idea. The genius of the operation and its fatal vulnerability was how entirely it depended on control of the physical counting room. As long as the mob controlled who worked in that room and who supervised them, the skim was invisible. There was simply nothing to find. The money did not exist on any ledger because it had never been recorded. The FBI's problem for years was exactly this. They knew the scheme existed. Informants had told them. Transcripts suggested it. But without documentary evidence from inside the counting room, they had nothing to bring to a federal court. That changed in 1979 when a Kansas City associate named Nicholas Civella made a mistake. He talked on a telephone that was tapped. The Civella tap was, in isolation, not enough. Federal prosecutors needed corroboration. They needed to connect the conversations to specific casino operations, specific individuals, specific dollar amounts. What followed was one of the most complex undercover financial investigations in FBI history. Agents embedded in Nevada regulatory bodies, informants placed inside casino management, wiretaps authorized across 4 states. The investigation ran simultaneously in Chicago, Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Las Vegas. The code name was Operation Strawman. For 4 years, the FBI built its case methodically. They documented courier routes. They identified the frontmen, legitimate seeming casino executives who processed the mob's influence on paper. They traced the cash backwards from delivery points in the Midwest to specific counting room shifts at specific casinos on specific nights. The evidence they assembled would eventually fill 300,000 pages of trial transcripts. It would result in convictions for the bosses of 4 separate crime families simultaneously, something that had never happened before in American legal history. But there was a problem. The investigation was moving slowly. The mob was still operating. And in 1983, someone inside the FBI's operation made an error. A source was compromised. The mob learned that surveillance was tighter than they had believed, and rather than shut down the skim and wait for the heat to pass, the rational strategic choice, the Kansas City leadership made a different decision. They decided to keep going. They needed the money too much to stop. By 1983, Las Vegas itself was changing. Corporate money had arrived. Howard Hughes had bought 4 casinos in the 1960s, establishing a precedent that legitimate business could own gambling operations. By the early 1980s, publicly traded corporations were entering the market. These corporations did not want mob involvement, not for moral reasons, for financial ones. Organized crime's involvement created regulatory risk, legal exposure, and reputational damage that made Wall Street financing impossible. The corporations hired lobbyists. They pushed Nevada to tighten oversight. They installed sophisticated electronic surveillance inside counting rooms. For the first time, the mob's control of the physical counting room was under threat from inside the industry itself. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. Carl Thomas, the casino executive who had managed the skim's logistics for nearly a decade, was confronted with the FBI's evidence. The agents had his records. They had the phone calls. They had the courier logs. They offered him a choice. Thomas cooperated. He gave the FBI the complete organizational structure of the operation, who ordered what, who paid whom, who knew what. The case was no longer circumstantial. It was documented from the inside. In 1983, federal indictments were issued simultaneously in Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Las Vegas. 16 defendants, 4 crime family bosses, charges including racketeering, tax fraud, and conspiracy. The trial began in 1985 and lasted 8 months. It was the largest organized crime prosecution in American history. The mistake that ended everything. The convictions came down in 1986. The Kansas City boss, the Chicago leadership, and associates across 3 other families were sentenced to federal prison. The Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, the casinos at the center of the operation were stripped of their mob-connected executives and placed under corporate management. The era was over. Las Vegas would never again be controlled by organized crime. But here is the part that changes everything about how you understand this story. The FBI did not defeat the mob in Las Vegas through superior intelligence. They defeated them because the mob refused to adapt. Every signal, from 1979 onward, said the operation was compromised. Every rational calculation said to shut it down. The bosses chose not to, because they had built their entire financial structure around the Las Vegas income stream. Stopping meant restructuring their entire operation, and they did not believe the FBI could actually build the case.